And Mike started campaigning after he lost his son, 31-year-old Ross, to suicide back in February 2021. Mike is joined by Ellie Scott, whose best friend Georgia took her own life in 2017. Really good to see you both. Really important to talk about this. Mike first. Look, full disclosure, we know each other. I know what happened to Ross. I've been moved by your posts about it. But also, a lot of people would say impressed by seizing the opportunity to get out there and talk more openly about it, which is what Baton of Hope is all about.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and what really motivates me, I guess, is that when Ross lost his life, he wrote a long farewell letter, writing to each member of the family in turn to say his goodbyes. But he also wrote a sentence that's sort of been resonating with me ever since, and that was, please fight for mental health. The support is just not there. And what he meant by that was that he'd suffered with severe depression for over 10 years. He went to the NHS to ask for therapy, and he was put on a 6-month waiting list. He died 2 weeks into the wait. And, you know, when your son, literally in his dying moments, asks you to fight for a campaign that he believed in, then you kind of do it, you know. So I've got all the motivation that I need.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Ross said that, has that given you sort of a bit more meaning, a bit more purpose in dealing with the bereavement that obviously comes after he lost his life?
Definitely, yeah. I discovered, Matt, you know, after we lost Ross, I did my research. I suppose, you know, the journalist in me kicked in, and I found out that, you know, he was just one man, we're just one family, and there are hundreds of thousands of people out there who are kind of overlooked and largely ignored. The research isn't there, the funding isn't there, the staffing isn't there. And it's a very common tale, you know, as you said. It's the biggest killer of men under 50 and women under 35. And those statistics have stagnated now for 17 years, little or no movement. And we want to bring it out into the open and prompt healthy conversations about how we can all get involved.
Yeah, and Ellie, that second stat that Mike mentioned there. Look, I think a lot of men of a certain age are probably aware that suicide is a big problem, but certainly younger women are succumbing to this, like your best friend, Georgia.
And yeah, we were, Georgia was 20 when she passed away, and it was such a heartbreaking experience, but being part of Baton of Hope, it's given me such light and such promise for the future, and hope that we will live in a zero suicide society.
And let's talk about Baton of Hope and the approach to it, because a lot of initiatives are getting people to open up and talk. It's hard to get away from the misery and the upset, but actually the fact that this is more hopeful, optimistic, open and inclusive is what you're all about, Ellie.
Absolutely. I mean, I was really lucky enough to carry the baton as part of the tour last year. And for me, it was such a personal moment, but to be able to carry it alongside Georgia's family. And I've never felt so safe, and I've never felt so supported and so loved and uplifted. Suicide is a really different kind of grief. And it's a really difficult thing to go through. And to be surrounded by people who just get it and understand was one of the most hopeful moments that I've had since losing Georgia.
And in very timely fashion, Mike, we should explain and describe what it is. I mean, it's not dissimilar to an Olympic and Paralympic torch relay. That's the inspiration, obviously, is going on right now, and that's what you're going to replicate for the second time next year.
Yeah, what happened last year when we first took it on tour was quite amazing. There was no precedent. We had a blank canvas and we didn't know how people would respond to it. But it was, you know, it seemed to carry such amazing power for people, as Ellie's just described. And something strange happened, you know, when we launched Baton of Hope. A company called Thomas Light, who were goldsmiths and silversmiths to the late Queen Elizabeth II, got to hear about us and said, do you want us to make this real? You know, your idea of something, a symbol that you could pass on to people as a symbol of hope. And of course, we kind of snatched the hands off, and it just so happens that I've got the iconic and exquisite symbol here. It's really heavy, but it's absolutely full of symbolism. In the base of the baton here, in the darkness of the handle where no one will ever see it, the words of Bishop Desmond Tutu are inscribed. Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. In the middle, we've got a lattice work that represents a community of people holding each other aloft. We have the upward spiral of silver and gold going to the top of the baton, again representing hope, and a semicolon in the top. And I didn't know until we lost Ross that the semicolon is used, particularly by younger people, as a tattoo, and it represents people who have survived a suicide attempt, and like a semicolon in the sentence, realize that actually there is more to come. It's not over. You can get through the darkness. And by taking this around the United Kingdom to 20 locations again next year, we're hoping to spread that message that don't feel that you are on your own. There are armies of people out here who want to help you and want to help you find that hope.
That is a great thing, the holding Mike then, and fantastic messages as well. Listen, I have to ask a couple more difficult questions about this, because we talked about the stats as to how many people succumb, leading killer of women under 35 and men under 50. We often hear stats about things like cancer, that 1 in 2 will be affected in their lifetime. Do we know how many people, not just those who take their own lives, but wider friends and family, are affected, Ellie, by suicide?
We know that 1 in 4 people will struggle with mental health. So that's a huge number in itself. And anybody who struggles with mental health has a risk of attempting suicide at some point. And it's also known that people who do take their own life aren't known to mental health services. There's a big proportion of people who do attempt suicide or succeed in taking their own lives who've never reached out to mental health services before. And it's really important that we do spread that message that there are so many services and so many different support options out there for you. It's about finding one that works for you to the point where you don't reach crisis.
Because, Mike, it's a difficult thing, isn't it, for people who haven't had those feelings or had depression or any of the other myriad reasons why someone might come to that decision. It's very difficult to understand why. So I know you're going on the Baton of Hope around the country to raise awareness, but also are you trying to impart some wisdom, some learning, some of your experiences of what Ross was going through to try to help people understand better what they might be able to do?
All of that, and we think that every sector of society can learn how to become involved. It may sound a bit airy-fairy to some people, but it is something so simple sometimes, like a smile to a stranger. But the stigma is one of the biggest things that we want to tackle. The fact that we still refer to committed suicide when the illegal status was lifted back in 1961. Here we are still using the language of the Dark Ages. In headlines, why do we say such and such a celebrity or sports star or whatever admits depression? What is there to admit? It's the common cold of mental health. I wouldn't admit to having a sore chest or a sore throat or a cold. So why should we have to admit to having depression? We've got to sort of lift that stigma away from suicide, because one of the key things that leads somebody to that dark point is not opening up about it, not discussing it, not sharing it. And we want to make sure that nobody out there feels that they can't share this with other people.
It's a really good point on the language, Ellie. I mean, the term committed suicide, and that's pretty much outdated these days. What is the best form of language for talking about it?
So I see this all the time. I think especially on social media, people haven't shifted with the culture as the language has changed. Suicide isn't a crime, so you haven't committed a crime. And using the word committed to describe suicide is, it's just unfair. And the best way to talk about somebody who has taken their own life is exactly that way. They've died by suicide, or they've taken their own life or ended their own life. That's the best kind of language to use.
Do you find that when people are talking to you both, they kind of tiptoe around the... I mean, look, people don't like talking about death in general, and will often use euphemisms and, they'll soft soap around it instead of just saying straight. What's preferable when it's someone who's to someone who's been deeply affected like you have? Mike, first.
Yeah, I know that, after we lost Ross and we just felt like pieces of driftwood, basically, and had no sense of purpose or direction. And I'll admit that there were times, or maybe I shouldn't use the word admit, there were times when I felt like I kind of wanted to follow Ross. But the support, the direct support and contact from friends and neighbours and even strangers was enormously helpful, I found. Everybody deals with this in different ways, and the ripple effect is absolutely catastrophic. But I can't speak for other people, but for myself, I really did find comfort in those cards and those messages and the outpouring of support.
How about you, Ellie, just to finish off? When people talk to you about it, do you prefer just straight talking, say it like it is, rather than talking around the issue?
Yeah, I think the word suicide to people seems scary, but it really isn't a word we should be scared of. It should be a word that we are talking about more. And there's a lot of misconceptions and myths that if you're worried about someone who potentially might be having suicidal thoughts, if you were to ask them directly, are you having suicidal thoughts? A lot of people think that might trigger them or make things worse, and actually it won't. Asking direct questions is definitely the best way to go. And even talking with people who have been bereaved by suicide, I will openly talk about what my experience has been and how it's affected me. And people just need to ask and be open about it. If I don't want to say anything, then I appreciate if people respect that. But having the support of lots of amazing friends and family around me really got me through this really awful time.
I'm so appreciative of you both talking to me about Baton of Hope. It's next September and October 25, and it goes all the way. Leeds, Derby, Portsmouth, Lincolnshire, Hastings, all over the place. Thank you both very much indeed. Appreciate that.